Good evening to you all and welcome again to Law of Sea and Maritime Law course. This is week 1 lecture 5. In the previous lectures we have discussed regarding the territorial boundaries, how they are created in terms of the law of sea, and today we will continue this discussion a bit more in detail, and also I would like to refer a case in regard to this. So in this map you can see what we can observe. There are coral reefs here. They are just at the baseline. So in this case the baseline will not be considered from the tip, from the last land mass, but the coral reef also will be included for determining the baseline. And it is permissible under the UNCLOS also to consider this coral reef area for considering the baseline or the elongated baseline. Now in this map you can see the southern part of India, where it's the coastal area, and how the coral reefs are all across this coastline area, and mainly where we need to apply the UNCLOS rules. That is when the coral reef, they are all across this India and Sri Lanka boundary, and in between you can see there is a Park Bay. So this is a narrow passage, water passage area that divides the Indian boundaries and the Sri Lankan boundaries. And many a times it has been questioned whether the Park Bay area is enough for the passage of the ships, or there should be a new passage for the ship. So why this question has been asked? Because there are this area, the territorial area gets prolonged because of the coral reefs. Similarly, across this Andaman Islands, Nicobar Islands, we can see the corals, and how the boundary will be determined. It is not from the baseline where the landmass ends, but we will consider here also the coral reef area. Next topic is regarding the bays. This article relates only to bays the coast of which belongs to the single state. Now normally the bays, they are like indented, deeply indented water body, and that water body is basically the sea water. Mainly from that bay, international law is considered also from the one state and also two states, or there can be multiple states. Now what I mean by the single state is, let's say I can show you here the map. Here this is the single state. So this is a simple map of the bay. But there can be situations where there are two different nations, like in this region this is nation A and this is nation B. So we consider that the bays, how we will determine the territorial waters for the bay area when there are two different states, that becomes questionable. Sometimes there can be three states. For example, closer to this area there is another state, or for some reason there is a partition between the nations. So there we have to determine how this bay area will be decided among the nations. Now there are various such examples, and one of the example that exists is the boundary division, the bay boundary division between India and Bangladesh. We'll come to that. We'll come to it very soon. So firstly, I go with the definition clause under Article 10 of the UNCLOS about the bay. This article relates only to bays the coast of which belongs to single state. That refers only to one state. For the purpose of this convention, a bay is well marked intention whose penetration is in such proportion to the width of its mouth as to contain landlocked waters and constitute more than mere curvature of the coast. An indention shall not, however, be regarded as bay unless its area is as large as or longer than that of the semicircle. This is the important point to be noted here, that it must be of that much circumference that it covers more than a semicircle area whose diameter is a line drawn across the mouth of that intention. I can show you one more map. This area is the bay area. Here you can see that there is a deep indention, and from these two ends the straight line is drawn that shows how the division can be made between different states, and we can see that it's more than semicircle area. So that is how the bay area is defined, which is also written here. The bay area and indention is larger than semicircle, whose diameter is two closing lines. These are the closing lines between this point and this point, whose total less than 24 nautical. The bay closing lines which is total less than 24 nautical miles are baseline. So therefore, the division between the two states, we need to consider that it should be less than 24 nautical miles. That means from this point to this point, it should be less than 24 nautical miles. Next is for the purpose of measurement, and the area of an indention is that lying between the two low water marks around the shore of indention and a line joining low water mark of its natural entrance points, where because of the presence of island and indention has more than one mouth, the semicircle shall be drawn on a line as long as the sum total of the lengths of the line across the different mouths. Island within an indention shall be included as if they were part of the water area of the indention. We'll come to this point in the India and Bangladesh case. Next is if the distance between the two low water marks of the natural entrance point of a bay does not exceed 24 nautical miles, a closing line may be drawn between these two low water marks, and the water enclosed there shall be considered as internal waters. Now, what is internal waters in this case? It is something of this nature, like if we are trying to see, this is the landmass area and this is the indented area. And what will be the internal waters area? A semicircle drawn like this, which is quite closer to the baseline that we are drawing between these 2 points. So all this will be the internal water area. And this is lesser than the 24 nautical miles. So what it says, where the distance between two low water marks of the natural entrance point of bay exceeds 24 nautical miles, a state baseline of 24 nautical miles shall be drawn within the bay in such a manner as to enclose maximum area of water that is possible with line of that length. I repeat the 4th point, if the distance between low water marks of natural entrance point of bay does not exceed 24 nautical miles. Now, what is the natural entrance point? Here, like this is the passage, so this becomes the natural entrance point across these 2 points that we have decided for drawing the baseline area. So, if it does not exceed 24 nautical miles, the natural entrance point, this area up till this does not exceed 24 nautical miles, a closing line may be drawn between these two low water marks, and water enclosed there shall be considered as internal water. So this will be the all that will be considered as internal water area. In the second case, that is the 5th point, where the distance between low water marks of the natural entrance point of the bay exceed 24 nautical miles. Now, if let's say this is more than 24 nautical miles, I put it plus 24 nautical miles. Now, what will be the situation in this case? A straight baseline of 24 nautical miles shall be drawn within the bay in such a manner as to enclose the maximum area of water that is possible with a line of that length. Now, it can be that let's say this much is, if we draw the line from here, this is the end point of the base, and this exceeds 24 nautical miles. That means this distance is plus 24 nautical miles. Then how we will do? We will measure what will be the last point for 24 nautical miles. Let's say up till this point it turns out to be the 24 nautical miles area. So we draw the line from this point onwards. This is 24 nautical miles in this case, where it is plus 24 nautical miles. And we will try to cover the maximum water that will be included in this area. So the maximum water means sometime it is like the area that is covered, all this area there that also has some islands or archipelagoic, but in that case we will try to make a tilt like this if there are islands or archipelagoic areas, because the idea is to cover maximum water here. Where the distance between the low water marks of the natural entrance point of the bay exceeds 24 nautical miles, a straight baseline of 24 nautical miles shall be drawn within the bay in such a manner as to enclose maximum area of water that is possible with line of that length. The foregoing provisions do not apply to historic bays or in any case where the system of straight baseline provided for in Article 7 is applied. Now, this is something that UNCLOS has devised. But what was the position prior to UNCLOS? In that case, in such cases, we considered it as historic bays. That means the division that was done between the states, or how the adjustment was made between the states prior to UNCLOS, through mutual agreement, that will be the course adopted by UNCLOS. So UNCLOS, as stated earlier, is based on the customary practices of the nation. Therefore, the historical methods that were adopted will be continued in certain circumstances where they are still followed in a peaceful manner. So the foregoing provision, that means the provisions we have discussed above, where there is a state baseline method adopted, or the semicircle is drawn and internal waters are decided based on 24 nautical miles. If there is more than 24 nautical miles, then we draw the straight line based on 24 nautical miles measurement. But in certain cases that will not apply. In which case it will not apply? Where another method has been applied or is in practice from the historical times. So the foregoing provisions do not apply to so-called historic base or in any case where the system of state baseline provided in Article 7 is applied. And that is for those the provisions is mentioned in Article 7. Now this is the picture of the bay, but this is belonging to one country. So here we do not find it very difficult to define it. But the definition and adoption of UNCLOS becomes relevant in cases where there are two different states sharing the bay water, and we have to determine the territorial boundaries between those states. Next is the ports. For the purpose of delimiting territorial sea, the outermost permanent harbor works which form an integral part of the harbor system are regarded as forming part of the coast. There is a question here, or it will be easier for us to understand in the question form, that the port is somewhat away from the territorial waters or the port is somewhat away from the baseline, then whether we include the port area while measuring the baseline or we exclude that, or it is considered as something external to the baseline. So usually it is the delimiting point, that means the baseline point where the ports are, there are ports. But if they are far from the mainland or far from the internal waters, then we exclude those for the measurement of the baseline. For the purpose of delimiting the territorial sea, the outermost permanent harbors works for an integral part of the harbor system are regarded as forming part of the coast. Offshore installation and artificial island shall not be considered as permanent harbor works. So if they are too far, then we do not consider, but if they are a bit closer to the mainland, then they are considered as part of the territorial waters. So for example, like let's say this is India's coastline. And now this is the baseline area for determining the territorial waters. This is the baseline area. Then it could be that there are islands somewhere here, or let's say this island is considered as port, one of the port. The question arises whether we consider this for the measurement of internal waters and we determine this for as a baseline area, and from here on we consider the territorial boundaries or the territorial sea area. For example, if this is the island, then we make this all as the internal waters, and from here we determine the territorial water area, baseline for the territorial water area. So this is possible in case the islands are, or the ports are closer. But if the port is a bit far, in some far off island, let's say it's Andaman Nicobar Islands here somewhere, then if there is port here, then how we will determine the internal waters in such cases? So internal waters in that case, or let's say the baseline for the territorial, this area will not be included. So it will only be this coastal area that will be covered for determining the baseline area, further determining the territorial waters. This is important because it depends upon how far the islands are and how far the ports are situated. So it says, for the purpose of delimiting territorial sea, the outermost permanent harbor works which form an integral part of the harbor system are regarded as forming part of the coast. Offshore installations and artificial islands shall not be considered as permanent harbor work. This is like a natural island. There can be artificial island created. In that case also we will not consider this artificial island for the purpose of delimiting the territorial sea. Delimiting territorial sea means firstly drawing the baseline, and after that from that baseline point we determine the territorial waters. Now this is the port in general. Here you can see this is the landmass, and from that landmass there is the passage for the ship, and we draw the baseline from this point onwards, the last tip of the landmass. Low tide elevation. Firstly, I would like to show its picture. Here, this is the low tide elevation. You can see it's partly, we can see the surface, land surface, but partly it's also covered by the water. Now, what happens usually when there are high tides, then all this gets covered with the water, sea water. But when there are low tides, that is, water has receded, it has gone in the seaward direction, then we can see the surface of the land. So that is why it is termed as low tide elevations. But the point to know here is which country has the right on low tide elevation, whether they are used for determining the boundaries between the state. Why this become important, although it may seem insignificant, it becomes important because sometimes these low tide elevations are having natural resources, for example petroleum, and maybe even some minerals that are of very high value. So therefore these low tide elevation becomes the bone of contention between the countries. Therefore under the UNCLOS it is important to determine its significance and also how this will be divided in case of such issues, how that can be politically divided between different states. A low tide elevation is a naturally formed area of land which is surrounded by and above water at low tide but submerged at high tide. Where a low tide elevation is situated wholly or partly at a distance not exceeding the breadth of territorial sea from the mainland or an island, the low tide line on that elevation may be used as the baseline for measuring the breadth of the territorial sea. This is something as stated earlier, that how we use the low tide area. So in case the low tide area falls within the breadth of the territorial sea, so that will be included. But if it is outside the territorial sea area, then it will not be included because it's considered outside the state's domain. So I repeat this, where a low tide elevation is situated wholly or partly at a distance not exceeding the breadth of territorial sea. So the final point is the extent of territorial sea, which is 12 nautical miles in general. The breadth of territorial sea from the mainland or an island. The low water line on that elevation may be used as the baseline for measuring the breadth of territorial sea. But if it is outside the territorial sea, then the low tide elevation will not be used. Where a low tide elevation is wholly situated at a distance exceeding the breadth of territorial sea from the mainland or an island, it has no territorial sea of its own. For example, we can understand it like this. If this is, or in this picture, here this is low tide area, and let's say this falls within the territorial sea water. So this will be included in determining the boundary of the territorial sea area. Like if from the baseline onwards, this all will be covered for determining the baseline. If it is outside the territorial sea, outside means, for example, the territorial sea water ends up here, and this is all low tide elevation. Firstly, there has to be some kind of caution here. If it is partly, then it will be included in the territorial sea. If it's like partly outside the territorial sea area, that means plus 12 nautical miles, and partly inside the 12 nautical miles. So then it will all will be included. But if it is totally outside, like if the territorial waters end up here and this is all outside, so then it will not be included. I repeat this. Where a low tide elevation is wholly situated at a distance exceeding the breadth. The word used is wholly, not partly. If it is partly included, then all will be covered. Wholly situated at a distance exceeding the breadth of territorial sea from the mainland or an island, it has no territorial sea of its own. No territorial sea of its own means if this is the low tide elevation, then it will be, and this is the island. It has no boundary relationship with this island. And if it is like here, this is the island and this is the territorial waters and this is the low tide elevation, so this will have the significance for distributing the boundaries, or then it will be like this boundary will be decided accordingly. because this will be considered as the internal water, and from here we draw the baseline and then the 12 nautical miles. So that kind of adjustment is there, but one thing is, in what case we include, what is important here, in what case we include the low tide elevation and in what case we exclude the low tide elevation. This is another picture of low tide elevation area. Next is right of innocent passage. This is an important point because usually people do confuse by the meaning of the term innocent passage. Innocent passage is a kind of customary practice which has now been translated into the term right. Customary practices in the sense, if there is a ship belonging to another country reaching closer to the coast of an alien nation or totally unknown nation, then whether the ship can enter that coast area or whether the ship can seek the permission to enter that coast area, and in what cases the coastal state has to give them permission to. There is two things. One is the permission based on the discretion of the coastal state, and second is that permission becomes kind of a necessity, or that permission is some kind of mandatory choice for the coastal state to be given. Now that mandatory choice for the coastal state to be given is based on the customary practices. It is not some kind of law enforcement, but on certain circumstances it is considered that the coastal state, considering the humanitarian grounds, must give the innocent passage to a ship belonging to a foreign state. So since that becomes kind of necessary choice for the coastal state or a mandate, customary mandate based on customary practices, that is why it is in another way translated as the right of innocent passage. Now, as the term innocent means, the ship has to declare that it is innocent. That means it is not going to create any harm to the coastal state through which it is seeking the right to enter. Now, why such kind of innocent passages are required? Maybe the ship is in danger, there is a failure in certain machine tools on the ship, or it is facing, there are people sitting in the ship, they are facing some health crisis and they must be taken closer to medical care unit. So in that case, or there can be some other urgencies where the ship need to be closer to the coast, or there has to be some rescue mission initiated for saving the life of the crew members or the people on board. In that case, the ship can show the white flag, or it can declare that it is innocent and seek the passage. And as per the customary practices, the coastal state does not deny it. Now, when can it deny? It can deny if it is having war with that particular nation. Then it's a kind of discretion. In that case, is like there is a state A and there is a state B. So state A and state B, they are at war with each other, and state B's ship for some reason gets closer to the coast of this state A, and they find there is a risk situation in their ship. So for that reason, they are asking for or requesting for an innocent passage from the state A. Now, the state A, realizing the fact that they both are in war with each other, can deny innocent passage at that time, because there can be some suspicion, or they may be presuming that this ship is carrying weapons, or that can be used for spying purposes. That is the kind of discretionary choice being given to the coastal state. But for the rest, when there is a clear reason to believe that this ship is not going to create any harm, the innocent passages are granted. Subject to this convention, ships of all states, whether coastal or landlocked, enjoy the right of innocent passage through territorial sea. Now, one thing that I would like to discuss here, the landlocked states also do have the rights to passage. Now, what are the landlocked states? They are the states, those do not have the coastal boundaries. That means they are all across covered by the land area, or there are different nations across their boundaries. So they are termed as landlocked state, but through UNCLOS they do have the right for passages across the sea area. The doctrine was elaborated in Article 14 of the Convention on Territorial Sea 1958, which emphasized that coastal state may not hamper innocent passage and must publicize any danger to navigation in the territorial sea. As stated earlier, prior to the formation of UNCLOS, the present UNCLOS, many conventions were conducted, and also many attempts were made for this establishment of the UNCLOS. So even during the earlier conventions or during the earlier such attempt, the innocent passage got its recognition. In the light of that, innocent passage got affirmation in the UNCLOS, the present UNCLOS. The doctrine was elaborated in Article 14 of the Convention on Territorial Sea 1958. This is one such convention prior to the UNCLOS, the present UNCLOS, that is in the year 1958, which emphasized that the coastal state may not hamper innocent passage and must publicize any danger to navigation in territorial sea. Passage is defined as navigation through territorial sea for the purpose of crossing that sea without entering internal waters or of proceeding to and from that sea, without entering internal waters or of proceeding to or from internal waters. It may include temporary stoppage, but if they are incidental or ordinary navigation or necessitated by distress or force majeure, that is unforeseeable circumstances that prevent someone from fulfilling the contract. So there are on what grounds? Basically, the first condition is when the innocent passages are requested. At that time, it's clear that they will not enter the internal waters, or they may try to enter some another sea area through that innocent passage. It can be like they are trying to reach some other destination through that innocent passage, and but sometime it can be that they are returning from the coastal state and then they are asking for innocent passage. So in that case, there are chances of internal waters, entering the internal waters. So that is an exceptional situation, but otherwise there is no such acceptance that the ship will be permitted to enter the internal waters. So we further continue the discussion, and I am very thankful for being part to this discussion, and thank you for now, and we continue the discussion in our next lecture. Thank you.